All right, friends, Chapter 3 of Personality and Wholeness in Therapy by Dr. J. Siegel and the PDP group. We're rolling now. Here's the thing. We are not doing any philosophy this time. This has quite a bit of science. We're going to dive into the science. This chapter is going to outline how Enneagram types form. He's got a view of how brain development takes place and how the types emerge out of that. That's going to be super helpful and something to lean into. I think there's lots of ways that you can get to 9 types because the combination of the triads are so clean, but he has a real interesting way in there that builds on affect groups and the centers, and we'll see how. So just starting at the beginning, this is page 43. Before diving deeply into the specific details, here's a high-level overview of our PDP framework of how we're coming to the Enneagram. It describes the 3 sets of fundamental needs that humans and many other species are strongly motivated by nature to satisfy, and 3 open, dynamic, interconnected motivational systems. It's a lot of gobbledygook. It's all thrown in there, but I know that you heard what I heard. He said many other species. This is a professor of psychotherapy at UCLA, and he thinks it's entirely fine to type your dog. That cat, definitely a 4. Just go with it. She's a 4. You know she's a 4. She knows she's a 4. That's how Enneagram typing works. And this professor of psychology is entirely fine with you going there. Aside from typing other species, we can type ourselves. Fundamental needs and motivational systems are in bold here, and that's because he's going to develop these ideas as we go. He's going to start talking about subcortical motivational systems. Subcortical motivational systems. He thinks that all the things that we need to talk about, most of the things we need to talk about Enneagram-wise, are going to be in your subcortical region of your brain. Now, the cortical region of your brain is the stuff, spongy stuff that's on the outside that when you think about the brain, this is what you probably envision. It's the outer brain, and that outer brain is responsible for thinking, for reasoning, for language, for consciousness. The subcortical, the interior stuff, is, I assume it's older evolutionarily. It's like reptilian. I may be wrong there. I'm probably making things up because I'm a philosopher. It's responsible for emotion, instinct, habit, and your survival systems. Survival systems is going to be a huge part of this, and he is pairing the Enneagram and what he thinks can be said scientifically about the Enneagram with this deep layer of the brain. And this space is the places in our brain that is automatic. It's less conscious, but this layer holds our memories. It holds our emotions, and it is responsible for our basic drives. Those sorts of things emerge in a lot of this literature. So, number 2, he's going to make this is my second quote on the bottom of 43. He's going to make a distinction between the appetites and the aversions, the appetitive elements and the aversive elements of our experience. He thinks these are primal, and actually I just want to say it that way and not go too far into this. When it comes to what we have an appetite for, this isn't explained as cleanly by the Enneagram. That's his claim. We're going to hit some spots where he thinks there might be something we're saying about the instincts, social, sexual, self-protective, that might be linked to our appetites and this appetitive side of ourselves. The aversions that we have, however, these deep aversions, that's where something can be said. And so pushing into that, as we'll explain further below, top of 44, each of these 3 motivational systems that he's going to talk about are tightly linked with a specific core aversive emotion and uncomfortable affective stance. The motivational systems are primary. That's his language for the centers of intelligence, or what he's going to end up calling vectors. and they're associated with an energy, with an emotion, a core aversive emotion. He names the core aversive emotions as anger, separation distress, and anxiety. Those should sound familiar. In my work, call that underlying feeling, anger, shame, and fear. Separation distress or sadness is what he wants to say. He doesn't use shame very often. He's going to talk about the desire of this portion of our nervous system as really focusing on bonding, and much of the emotion that comes out of not bonding, separation distress or sadness, being the aversive emotion that gets kicked out. So just well worth noting here that same kind of concepts, dialoguing about what term is best is always helpful, worthwhile. In fact, we started a podcast called Rewired that's all about that. And so that's where we're going to be going. But he thinks that when the motivation's middle of 44, when the motivation is frustrated or impeded, the correlated affective states include a range of anger or rage associated with agency. That would be the body. Agency, body wants agency, and anger when it doesn't get it. Separation distress or sadness when bonding, heart and its emotion. Anxiety or fear with certainty, head and its emotion. So this for those of you who are real into Enneagram, that should be just common language. He's dressing it up in some psychological, psychotherapeutic vernacular that he's gonna prefer, and that's where we're going. We're launching. First thing he's going to talk about here then is vectors. What he calls vectors. These are correlated with, again, head, heart, gut. The term vector is helpful in describing the energetic qualities of these aversive and appetitive affects and their corresponding motivations, as it conveys setting a direction for the focus of attention or salient elements of experience related to meaning and placement of energy into behavior. Big thing for him. And I'm going to just go ahead and state the punchline up front, because otherwise it just takes forever to unpack. He thinks that the 9 types are defined by the centers of intelligence and affect groups. Specifically in affect groups, the direction of that's associated with the affect groups. Now, a little bit of background here. Dr. David Daniels, Stanford professor, ended up doing most of his Enneagram stuff focuses on the affect groups, what he calls the harmony triads. The thing about affect groups, harmony triads, these emerge out of object relation theory. Object relation theory focuses on 3 big emotions: frustration, rejection, and detachment. I don't know if those are emotions. That's probably wrong. These are ways that we, the feelings that we experience specifically for them, with early experiences of our parents. And that object relation theory carries into, our older lives, because, the wiring in our brain gets set. Now, here's the thing about affect groups, object relation theory, those energies and the rest. One of the things that Riso and Hudson showcase in their book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, is that there is direction going on with these feelings. Frustration is energy that goes inward. Rejection is that energy that pushes outward. And detachment and attachment kind of is in the balance between inward and outward. Now, big for Siegel is those directions of energy. And we're going to see this all over his language. And this is how he's going to get to the 9 types. It's that in response to anger, some types are going to have an inward response to their anger, some an outward response to their anger, and some going in both directions. Many of you are familiar with my work will know 8's pushing their anger outward, 1's pushing their anger inward, 9's going in both directions. That establishes the type. You have 2 lists of 3, and then you just put them together. So there's anger, shame, fear, or what he called anger, separation, distress, and anxiety, and how we respond to that. So for separation distress, for 2s, 3s, and 4s, 2s, their separation distress, the energy goes outward. For 4s, the separation and distress goes inward. For 3s, it goes in both directions. And that's how you establish the type. You just overlap one list and the other list. 3 times 3 equals 9. And that's how he gets the types. Page 45. We need to have agency for an embodied empowerment to have our bodily needs met in order to survive. We need to bond for relational connection to survive, and we need to be certain with some capacity for prediction and safety to survive. In this way, these 3 aversive motivational systems become activated with a threat to our survival. The appetitive states emerge when we satisfy those drives. Here it is. You want to know how the centers of intelligence kind of come into being? Primary to your nervous system is getting your body parts in the right place at the right time. The evolution of a mammal has occurred over time to produce the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproducing. Evolution's all about the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproducing. The thing here is that anger, separation, distress, and anxiety, these are uncomfortable emotions kicked out by your nervous system because they insist on agency, on your ability to bond with others, and on pushing you towards some sense of certainty. If you have control, agency, if you bond with others, relationships, if you have certainty, you're analytic and deductive and understand the world, you're just vastly more likely to survive, to pass on your DNA, to flee from potential aggressors, to fight the things that need fought and pushed back for you to establish dominance, etc. You guys will be familiar with how all this works. So the need for survival is written into your nervous system, as it were, producing motivation. And that's how, in essence, your brain has been fashioned up until this point in time, Bottom of 45. In a state of wholeness, there's the feeling of empowerment, of connection, and of safety. Empowerment, connection, safety. You'll hear head, heart, body there. In a state of wholeness, you can see how the agency, bonding, and certainty systems are satisfied. So I don't know that this is what wholeness means for him when he's talking about it in therapy. He may need to talk more about this, but certainly biologically, if you feel as like you have control and have friends and loved ones, if you feel like you know what's going on, you're going to feel pretty good in the world. That's in essence what wholeness is here. And there is a positive experience, the appetitive states, that corresponds to this. And he'll unpack that in this chapter. And again, we're not going to go too far into it because it doesn't relate to Enneagram. And he says so. But that's where we're going. Next quote, this is on page 46. Together, the various pathways involved in an essential repertoire of what we call adaptive strategies. These amount to different ways of streaming attention and emotional energy down specific pathways into behavior that is most likely to be functionally useful and socially acceptable according to the situation in the moment. I think functionally useful is helpful because the functionally useful is probably, well, they could all, never mind, it doesn't matter. Socially acceptable will probably be in accord with bonding. Each pattern also involves a configuration of directionality, of attention and energy we call a tendency, A-T-T, a tendency, and a mode of emotional regulation that monitors and modifies our affective states. I made up the term a tendency to indicate the tendency of attention and energy in general to be in a particular direction. I didn't have a term for this, so I think I would call it like affect directions or something like that, but a tendency works. We'll throw that in the list of our vocabulary things to talk about. A tendency focuses on the attention of our energy that can be inward, outward, or divided between inward and outward. Now, again, he ends up being a scholar in early childhood development. And he says on page 47, one's a tendency may be an innate feature we can place under the broad notion of temperament. That's a big claim there. if it's very early, if a tendency is part of temperament and temperament is part of like your pre-birth mental makeup, that means that your Enneagram type is prior to birth. That would just be how that would work. If you already have your energy going inward, outward, or in both directions, and if that, that primary, well, if the vector, if your underlying feeling, if one of those emerges as most dominant is prior to birth, then your Enneagram type is prior to birth. Now, he's going to go into why that might not be the case, that this is debatable, but it is stated here that that's like a real possibility. So, for what that's worth. Top of 48. While a tendency may be a part of temperament's proclivity, one's emotion regulation mode may be more a learned part of one's overall adaptive strategy. That seems obvious to me, but I outlined it. Emotional regulation is something you need to work on after you're born. And we're talking to you, 13-year-old. Summarizing all this, this is the middle of 48. We're proposing that these adaptive strategies are the roots of what have been described as the 9 Enneagram personality types. A pattern of developmental pathways, a PDP, would then involve a neural groove, a set of neural networks strengthened from temperament and experience, a literal neural pathway that is reinforced to enable the individual to adapt well. A PDP groove creates an enhanced probability of a certain way of feeling, thinking, behaving that we call personality, associating type with personality. But another way our personality tendencies emerge when a particular pathway and its adaptive strategy becomes a predominant way of orienting attention and channeling emotional motivation. It's a good summary of the whole project up till this point. 12, page 48. In other words, one set of needs has become most salient, most relevant, and dominant, creating what we call a core motivation, and one of the various possible strategies has become an adaptive strategy for coping with life. These motivations and strategies reveal what creates a priority in an individual life, and this leads to what he calls and other calls the ego. Personality and ego just seem to go together, don't they? Like the idea of strategies here, obviously, some of you will know that in our book, we talk about strategies. When we talk about strategies, we talk about the overlap of your center and your stance. For him, strategy has to do, again, with the centers and their motivations and how that motivation is being fulfilled directionally through its attention and energy. And that's where we're at. Now, he is really concerned with excess. And the reason that he's concerned with excess is because your brain, if you keep pushing the pellet button over and over and over again, and you keep getting the response that you want from the world, what's going to happen in your brain is those neural pathways are going to get deeper, wider. The energy that you have is just going to flow into those spaces, and they're really hard to get out of once they become ruts. And we all know this. Habits are hard to break, and mental habits are hard to break. And thank God for neuroplasticity. You can change. Your brain can change. You can actually rewire your brain, as it were. But excess is a problem. And so he says, middle of 49, conversely, problems arise when integration is impaired, essentially meaning that over time and in the unique context of the individual's developmental trajectory, one of the sets of needs, agency, bonding, or certainty, becomes more salient and reinforced than the others. This may be how the prioritizing of one has become excessively differentiated, not being linked to the capacities of the other vectors. This low integrative state leads to an excessively dominant, a tendency of the individual as well, a dominance of one of the vectors of that system, thus limiting available ways of seeking satisfaction and restricting how other vectors and tendencies may be accessed and developed. Pausing there for a second. Both the thing that you want, agency, bonding, certainty, that becomes more inflamed, more strong, can become dominant in a way that it represses the other two. And the direction, likewise, can get pushed over and over again. The anger goes inward, the anger goes inward, the anger goes inward. See how this works? I want agency over myself. I want agency over myself. I want agency over myself. That is the story of the one. And excess for the one looks like this. It's being written into your brain over time. He continues, the net result is a tendency for skewed perceptions and channeling of attention and motivational energy in a limited, habitual, and force-fitted way in situations where another vector, a tendency or mode of emotion regulation would provide a more optimal and adaptive response to conditions at hand. If you want to know where he's headed with this whole thing, it's there. He wants to say something to the effect of, we need to loosen up. We need to loosen our type up. We need to have more flexibility pushing into our other centers, as it were. And we need to be able to push outward and in both directions as well when it comes to how our energy flow works within us. So, page 50 is a word to therapist, which I thought was helpful, well worth finding on that one. Page 51, picking up with how the 9 types emerge. One of the key triad groupings the Enneagram nomenclature describes is organized by a center of intelligence of the body and gut, the heart, or the head. The center of intelligence terminology emerged because 3 of the patterns were seen as tending to perceive or know the world through bodily sensation and movement, 3 through heartfelt feelings, and 3 through logic and critical thinking. When describing the 3 triads, by the way, Katie Whitlock, he used the word logic here, and you will know that I hate the hell out of this as how we are describing head types. Okay, with that in mind, set aside for a minute. Katie wins this point because PhD. This guy knows things that much more than Jeff Cook does. When describing the 3 triads, we prefer to group them around motivations we are calling the vectors of agency, bonding, and certainty. Okay, so this is preference as opposed to centers of intelligence. We see this particular 3-way division as correlating with a tendency for emotional reactivity to adversity to be flavored initially and most strongly by a dominance of anger, separation, distress, or fear, emerging from the subcortical motivational networks, those underlying parts of your brain. These underlie the vectors. However, these aversive emotions tend to be processed very differently in the 3 patterns within each triad. This is exactly what we've been saying. They're going to be processed in these different directions. He continues. Second, the 3 personality patterns within each triad, what we will call a trio within a given vector. A trio. That would be like 891 is a trio, 234 is a trio, 567 trio. These trio within a given vector seem to place a lot of value on a set of shared concerns that we will describe momentarily. In other words, we have 3 vectors, agency, bonding, and certainty, and within each vector, there's a trio of patterns. That makes for 9 patterns in total. Voila, 9 forms. Enneagram. Our proposal is that a trio within a vector is determined by which of the 3 tendencies is dominant, inward, outward, or didactic, both going inward and outward. These are things I've already said quite a bit about. One thing that's worth noting here is I want to highlight Katie Whitlock's work on wings. She, to my knowledge, is the first to kind of just talking about wings is saying we really need to push into exactly this, the underlying feeling and the direction, and think about wings on these fronts because there's shared properties across those trios, across these types, and we can probably learn something. So 5s and 6s, for example, both of them are opposing the world out there. And so when they both 5s and 6s share the same anxiety, both of them push outwardly. The 6 pushes didactically, both inward and outwardly. But 5s and 6s, because they're both pushing outwardly against anxiety, against what they fear out there, there's overlap, and there's something that can be learned across types. And that was what Katie and I's series on wings really went into, and she had just great things to offer on that front. So too, by the way, 6s and 7s would be the opposite. The 7 is fleeing something within. The 6 also feels uncomfortable with something within. Both are producing anxiety, and something can be learned from how 6s and 7s are in the world on that front. All right, well, let's get into each of the triads. The trios. Bottom of 52, we're going to start with the body. As the Enneagram diagram had origins in mathematical patterns, it uses a number designation for each of the types. It postulates 1 to 9 using the numerical indicators. It's a really complicated way to say there's 9 types labeled 1 through 9. The 3 anger-associated personality patterns, 8, 9, and 1, in conventional Enneagram terminology of the gut-body triad, as they often begin, all share concerns around the state of empowerment and control of the body and sense of individual agency and inclusion, ensuring well-being and integrity of body and sense of self, comfort and satisfaction of needs and desires, protection from violation, attention to right versus wrong, and just versus unjust. That's a good kind of summary. There's lots of things, obviously, that can be included in that. Hey, pick up Around the Circle, the new book by Cook and Wilson. They have 3 chapters on this. He continues, patterns of aversive emotional reactivity involving anger are a common thread across all 3, but expressions of anger tend to be experienced in very different ways in each pattern within this triad. We came to call this vector of agency for embodied empowerment, or simply agency. As we'll discover, the contrast of empowerment versus helplessness has a relevant automatic nervous system mechanism with a dominant presence in the subdiaphragmatic organs. Friends, you got some subdiaphragmatic organs. That's the gut. The gut of the digestive system. And apparently there's some literature that posits that the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve is activated in states of helplessness. This is science, y'all. This is the branch that extends below the diaphragm and involves our abdominally located gut feeling. Idea being that you got like a gut brain, I think. There is part of your nervous system, like your whole nervous system is doing business work and coming to something like conclusions, I suppose. It is certainly producing a feeling, and it's certainly big and dominant down there in your gut. It is subdiaphragmically oriented under your organs or in your organs. But this is what when those who talk about gut types or body types are elevating, he wants to associate it with this part of your nervous system. I think that's interesting. I'm not sure if it's true. I know a lot of folks know way more about this than I do, so taking him at his word. All right, I'm going to pause here. The full episode is actually up at aroundthecircle.org. Go there, sign up for a membership, jump into this sucker. We are creating a Enneagram class. This may be one of the highest level classes on Enneagram available anywhere in the world right now. Sometimes such classes might go for $500, $1,000, $2,000. I'm charging $20 for you to jump in per month. Sign up for a membership. You get this and all the other things that are at our website. Personal interaction with me, personal interaction with some really intelligent folks who are going through this material together in our Tuesday night classes. Sign up, get the links for Zoom, join us for the classes, read along. This is going to be one of the best explorations out there on this book, on any Enneagram book, really, that's been covered recently. I'm real proud of what we're doing. So that's what I got. Go to aroundthecircle.org, and I'll catch you next time.